So this video is the result of my increasing amounts of disappointment and frustration with seeing how many influencers are using their social platforms. For months and years now, I have watched many influencers within the equestrian world particularly, but many other niches, not get political. And when they're asked about it, they will outright state, I don't want to get political, I don't want to get involved in politics. And because of this, they have neglected to participate in any meaningful discussion about a number of humanitarian issues and a number of acts of violence that are honestly primarily imposed on marginalized groups of people. They have chosen not to weigh in. They have chosen to stay neutral and say that they're staying out of politics, only to now jump into the discussion about politics to express their remorse for Charlie Kirk's death and say how unfair it is, or in Raleigh Link's case, say that people are nuts or crazy for not liking the guy. And I have such a massive problem with that because it's exposing an issue in the horse world that I already knew was present. But a lot of people were much more covert about their lack of care of issues that are impacting marginalized groups of people. And now they're going full mask off in showing that they not only have the capacity and ability to advocate and to get involved in politics and to use their platforms for these things, but they are willing to do so depending on the person it is. And there is nothing more that speaks for how some lives are valued more than others than this exact case, because people are now using their platforms to advocate for someone who stood for what happened to him. And I'm going to make this clear. I do not condone what happened to Charlie Kirk. I do not condone gun violence. But Charlie Kirk condoned what happened to Charlie Kirk.
I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational.
Now, I'm going to preface this with saying that I think he said that believing that he would never be the target of such gun violence. And this is the exact problem, is a lot of people hold these perspectives where they support things that disproportionately impact other people in other groups. And they do so because they never think they're going to be the target. And then when the problem hits them, suddenly it becomes a major issue. Charlie Kirk said that after a mass shooting impacting school children. No one should have to go to school worrying about getting gunned down. No one should have to go to watch a public event like what Charlie Kirk was hosting and worry about being shot or being in danger. That shouldn't happen. The trauma of the people who had to witness that happen to him and who were there and had to fear for their own lives, not knowing if it was targeted or not, that is awful, and no one should have to experience that. But that is an issue that has presented itself in so many other events that these people who are now advocating on behalf of Charlie Kirk have never spoken out about. And there is no clearer action, in my opinion, than that to display that their empathy and their outrage and their desire to advocate is selective. It does not apply to everyone, which means that there are many people within the equestrian community who do not provide a safe place for marginalized people. The fact that someone like Raleigh Link thinks it's nuts for people to not like Charlie Kirk shows a lack of grasp on reality, or at minimum, a lack of desire to understand why certain people are so offended by the things that he said and why so many of the things that he said are problematic and how they hurt marginalized people. And in my opinion, there is a limit for things that people can show within their character. And no matter how many other good things you believe someone has said, if they use their platform to be racist or homophobic or transphobic or otherwise hateful to marginalized groups on multiple occasions, if they use their platform for that, you cannot cancel out the fact that they've said those things using other things that they've said that you agree with. Because the fact of the matter is, there's always going to be another type of person who is saying similar things that you might recognize as good without saying the racist and hateful speech. There's always going to be other people who perpetuate these views without being deliberately hateful to marginalized groups who are already at a disproportionate risk of violence. So, whether people are ready to admit it or not, if you are willing to overlook many of the things Charlie Kirk has said, which I'm going to show, it does say something about what you stand for. And it shows that there is a lack of consideration for marginalized groups and that your empathy and your desire to push back against violence and push for change is selective depending on who it impacts. And that is the exact problem. This issue has exposed how a lot of people can get involved in advocacy and are willing to, depending on who it affects. But before we jump into the stuff that Charlie Kirk has actually said on video that is proven and that I can show you, and why it is so hateful and problematic, let's talk about some other acts of violence that have occurred within the last few months. Starting with Democratic House Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, who were both shot and killed in their own home, and the shooter also shot and killed their dog. So that is an example of political violence where we did not see flags put at half-mast or anywhere near the same number of discussions about political violence and how unacceptable it is. And many of the people who are now having the biggest outcry for Charlie Kirk said nothing about this instance and did not seem to be concerned about this instance of political violence where someone was not even safe in their own home. Why? That happened back in July. That is an instance of political violence where there is senseless killing and use of guns to end lives of people over disagreements. So for the people who are now speaking about Charlie Kirk, why was there no commentary on that? Why did that not concern you? Why was that not an issue? Why did you not use your platforms to advocate for those people? Another state senator, John Hoffman, was shot 17 times and he miraculously survived, but that's another example of political violence that occurred a few months ago that had very little coverage and commentary, and I didn't see any of these people who are now jumping into political discourse talking about that. So I think that these two instances alone kind of expose the fact that this really isn't about gun violence and targeted shootings where people are killing people over ideological differences, because if it were, their outcry should be for everyone, not just this one instance. Let's go a little bit deeper. Another example of violence that people have supported by saying nothing and just remaining complacent about because apparently it wasn't a big enough issue is the ongoing bombing of people in Palestine. Which, by the way, today the UN Commission of Inquiry has concluded that the Israeli government is committing genocide and they're calling for an arms embargo. This is a concern that has been voiced by many people over the last almost 2 years now, and Doctors Without Borders and other organizations that are doing humanitarian work in the area have been very concerned about because they've been seeing the level of carnage. The death toll is estimated to be more at around 680,000 now because there's bombing deaths and then there's deaths from starvation and exposure and all of the other problems that stem from completely eradicating hospitals and just destroying people's way of living, leaving them with nothing. That has been ongoing for years. It has been publicly documented. There are videos of children that have lost their parents or had limbs blown off. They are victims of violence. And worse than people just ignoring this, I have actually seen in comment section influencers supporting what is going on and saying that Israel is fighting terrorism. There is not a single population of millions of people that you can find that will agree on one topic, much less millions of people all being terrorists, including many, many children. So that excuse is a cop-out used to dehumanize and justify the ongoing attacks on these marginalized people. It is used to degrade their humanity so that people don't care when their lives are impacted and when they're victims of violence. And this has been ongoing. This is still ongoing. A lot of people also were advocating for Charlie Kirk on the basis that he was killed for exercising his right to free speech and that we need to protect free speech. And I just wanted to point out the fact that a lot of people were radio silent when peaceful protesters were being arrested for protesting about their tax dollars being used to go bomb Palestinian people. Additionally, there has been very little, if any, commentary in the horse world from these people that are now getting political for Charlie Kirk about the number of journalists that have been killed since October 7th, 2023. So it's almost 2 years at this point. At least 247 journalists in Gaza have been killed. Did you know that in World War I and World War II combined, so that's about 10 years of war, that there was an estimated 69 journalist deaths in 10 years? So in a fifth of the time, or less than that, more than triple of the journalists have been murdered in Palestine. If this is about free speech, why does that not concern anyone? Why does it not concern you when your governments are sending off billions of dollars to support that level of carnage? If it is about free speech, nonviolence, and fairness and ethicality, why are you not concerned about these issues? Is it just because they impact marginalized people and you don't identify with those people? Is it just because it's far enough away that you don't have to look directly at it and you don't feel threatened by it? I think that it's that people don't identify with marginalized people at all, so they don't care what happens to them. And then when someone that they identify with is finally the target of such violence, then they're concerned because it's finally their people that are under attack. Did you know the leading cause of death for children in the US is guns? And in the last year, we're not even through all of 2025, but just in 2025, there has been over 300 mass shootings. So if violence is not the answer, and if violence is what people are concerned about, if they are actually looking to address this systemic issue, there should be more vocal advocacy for many, many other things. These are just a few of the many, many instances of violence that have been perpetrated on marginalized people within a short span of time. This is without even really touching on specifics relating to police brutality, where Black people are disproportionately targeted and murdered by police. And Charlie Kirk was someone who actively was terrible to the family of George Floyd with what he said about George Floyd after his death. He called him a scumbag. He said he didn't care about his death. And he said a lot of things that if anyone were to now say them about Charlie Kirk, his supporters would take issue with it and say that it's not fair to speak ill of the dead like that. There is so much hypocrisy, and there is so much evidence of people caring more about Charlie Kirk because he is someone they identify with, and taking issue with things that people are saying now that they actively supported in people like him and others like him. There is a lot of hypocrisy, and I have such a big problem with that. For the record, I'm biracial, I'm super white passing, so I reap all of the benefits of not experiencing racism directed at myself personally the vast majority of the time. So I can speak for the fact that a lot of people are comfortable being more overtly racist in front of other white people or people that they perceive as white because it happens directly in front of me. I also get treated differently than people of color when I'm hanging out with them, when we're going shopping or whatever. They will get racially profiled and I will not. These things are systemic issues that are happening on an ongoing basis that have been primarily ignored by people who are now loudly advocating and setting up things like memorial rides and doing all sorts of public acts of advocacy on behalf of Charlie Kirk, while they do not advocate for massive groups of people that are being impacted by violence that is similar or much, much, much worse and has been ongoing for years. And there's been numerous instances over the course of years, multiple times a year, hundreds of times a year, that are not spoken out on. The hypocrisy is so blatant. So basically what I'm saying here is, let's not pretend that this is about people condemning violence or taking issue with people being targeted for exercising their right to free speech, because they're not applying that logic to everyone. It's selective. They think that these things only apply to people that they identify with and people that they support. I have witnessed a lot of people who are now openly supporting Charlie Kirk actively support the persecution of marginalized groups of people and not care when they are impacted, that they don't care about crimes that impact Black people, that they don't care about the children in Gaza who had families, who had hopes, who had dreams, the fathers in Gaza who had children and wives and are now being bombed and murdered or gunned down by the IOF. They did not care about those things. Their empathy is selective. And they are now trying to martyr someone who used his platform to spread hate and division. And any of the good stuff that he perpetuated religiously does not cancel out the hate speech that he engaged in. So now let's hear Charlie Kirk in his own words. When I shared these quotes to my Instagram story, I was told to burn in hell. And I was told that I was being disgusting and awful by sharing things that he actually said in his lifetime. We don't owe it to someone in their death to scrub clean their entire history of things that they've said and misrepresent the type of person that they were. That is not cruelty. That is not celebrating their death. It is accurately portraying some of their problematic traits that people want to overlook and try to gloss over now that they're dead so that they can martyr him. These are things that he actually said. So my question to anyone after you watch these clips is, do you agree with what he said in these clips? Are you okay with this? Do you support that? And if you don't, you should be making that abundantly clear and advocating against this type of speech because it is harming people.
It's fun. It's always fun. I get a chuckle, when someone is wearing the, Free Palestine shirt and the gay flag. And
it's like, they would literally murder you, right?
So, it's funny. I used to say that, hey, if you as a gay person would go to Gaza, they'd throw you off of tall buildings, right? Now they don't have any tall buildings left, so I don't.
When you mess with the bull, you get the horns.
Is that too soon? I'm sorry. Maybe you shouldn't kill Jews, stupid Muslims. Why should I have empathy for a race? I have white guilt because I breathe?
They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously.
So you're comparing abortion to the Holocaust?
Absolutely, I am. In fact, it's worse. I'm sorry. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. The biggest thing is this. More young women need to get married at a younger age and start having kids. The single woman issue is one of the biggest issues faced in a civilization. They're not as desirable in the dating market or in the dating pool, and so they start to lash out on the rest of society. And we have miserable women because we've been shuffling them into a corporate wasteland when in reality, a lot of them don't find a lot of passion or fulfillment in that.
Reject feminism. Submit to your husband, Taylor. You're not in charge.
And most importantly, you got to change your name. I think that is so against our senses, so against the natural law, and dare I say, a throbbing middle finger to God is the transgender thing happening in America right now. He said, Charlie, why are you so pro-Israel? One of the reasons I'm pro-Israel is that when Israel gets invaded on their border, they defend their border. If 300 Palestinian Arabs tried to run in Israel like that, it wouldn't end well for them. These doctors need to be put in prison quickly. We need to have a Nuremberg-style trial for every gender-affirming clinic doctor. We need it immediately.
There is a lot of hypocrisy in saying that someone is a warrior for free speech, while so much of their speech is about controlling the decisions of other people. Saying that women's job is to get married and have kids, and that they shouldn't be prioritizing their career, and that they should have to change their last name to suit their husband. Saying that trans people shouldn't be able to access gender-affirming care. It might be free speech that he has the right to technically say, but he is not advocating for freedoms for other people. Freedom for me and not for thee is what he was advocating for. And that's the entire issue. People don't actually want freedom if their version of freedom involves taking away rights from other people. I also want to share some information that's very upsetting, but yesterday in Mississippi, there was 2 instances where Black men were found hanging from trees in a way that very much looks like a lynching. And right away, especially with one of them, they tried to rule it as no foul play suspected and are calling it a suicide, despite his family being vehemently outspoken about the fact that he was excited to start his first day of university at Delta State University and was not suicidal. I don't think it's a coincidence that these things are starting to happen more, and that they're starting to happen right after someone who perpetuated racist commentary towards Black people has been martyred and is being idolized to an extent that is very dangerous and scary. If you want to look up the speech from Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and how he's spoken about Charlie Kirk, it also goes to show that people who are committing violence are using Charlie Kirk to be like, we condemn violence, while their actions say completely otherwise. He is being martyred and used to continue to create division and promote rhetoric that is violent and hateful towards marginalized groups of people, and it's extremely concerning. I'm going to finish this video with sharing some videos from Black creators explaining why the things Charlie Kirk said are racist, because they explain it very well and they're doing a better job than I am. So for anyone interested in learning about racism, I encourage you to learn from people of color. I also encourage you to stay away from the excuse of, he had Black friends, he can't be racist. Abusive men also have wives. Abusers can be around the people that they abuse, and they can still be saying harmful things or doing harmful things. Having a Black friend does not cancel you out from being racist. Black people can also even be racist towards other races or colorist towards their own people, etc. Like Kanye West is a great example of a Black person that's racist. having a black friend does not mean you're not racist. And if that is your go-to buzzword to try to justify instances where he has said racist things, it is just a pathetic attempt. Anyways, that's all I have to say. I think Raleigh Link has abused her position of power as an influencer, and I think what she's said is disgusting. And it's quite frankly just really upsetting to see someone who has so much influence and has the capacity to advocate for big change and help people who really, really need the help use their platform in this case and not in any others. I think it's an indicator of how selfishly motivated a lot of her stuff is. And I find it really, really concerning that someone who is such a staunch advocate for animal welfare doesn't have it within them to empathize with marginalized people. And it's gross.
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Okay, let's talk about it. These are obviously racist claims, but I will respond to them as if Charlie Kirk were a reasonable person.
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Wrong. Just 38% of America's prison population is black. That's according to the U.S. government. But it makes you wonder why Charlie feels the need to add an additional 12% to the black prison population. Could it be because his bigoted talking points only work if he exaggerates them? If Charlie were actually looking for the race that makes up half the prison population in the U.S., he'd look no further than white people at 57%.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do.
Wrong. The word "so" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes.
He's saying "so" as in therefore, as in one could conclude, but Charlie knows he's lying. Even if he hadn't just lied about the black prison population, Charlie is smart enough to know that correlation does not equal causation, but he's hoping that you don't know that. So he deploys the word "so" to make you think he's coming to an obvious conclusion.
Exactly.
So blacks
Instead, he's making an illogical racist leap. Charlie knows that we don't have usable data about who commits crimes. It's impossible to have that data since so many crimes go both unreported and or unsolved. Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment. What's painfully obvious is that Charlie Kirk isn't interested in understanding the statistics he so carelessly misquotes. He's interested in making bad faith arguments. Something that becomes even more obvious in his next point.
blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Wrong again, and loud this time. If Charlie were interested in honesty, he would have mentioned the other 1350 statistic. Yes, black people are about 13% of the population, but make up 53% of all criminal exonerations. In fact, black people make up 55% of all murder exonerations specifically. Black people are more likely than any other group in this country to be convicted of crimes they did not commit. And then people like you have the nerve to parade these stats around as though they prove something. The reality is that you probably know these stats, but you leave them out on purpose because to bring that stat into this conversation would make some people think. And that's the last thing a person like you wants.
White people are in a pissing match on who is the most civilized white, and they are using Charlie Kirk's death in order to prove that. I will show you how. It requires a little work in whiteness studies, and this is a great book, The Heart of Whiteness by Julian B. Carter, Normal Sexuality and Race in America, 1880 to 1940. And what this book talks about is in the creation of whiteness, there's also the creation of heterosexuality, right? The creation of heterosexuality. I know that so many of you have been taught that heterosexuality is just normal, and this is the way that animals are. It's not. It's not. It is a complete creation inside of whiteness in order to make white people feel that they were the most civilized, right? So they use things like monogamy, heterosexuality, cisgender, marriage in order to situate themselves as better, which is why a big platform that Charlie Kirk used, and he manipulated and groomed young people into only seeing the most important part of their whole existence is to get married, is rooted inside of this, right? Inside of this history and inside of the continuation of whiteness, because as we all understand, under the white replacement myth, right, the fear that white people will become extinct, they are doing everything and have since the beginning of them, creating whiteness, that they were going to be gone. They were going to be riddled, non-existent. So they have done everything from genocide to indigenous communities to overturning Roe v. Wade to assert their dominance. It's all created. It's all constructed. It's nothing that is naturally occurring at all. Okay, so what really struck me yesterday when JD Vance took over Charlie Kirk's podcast from the frickin' White House is that he said this.
All the time about the most important thing you could do is not vote for a particular candidate. It was to become, if you were a young man, a husband and a father. He talked about the joy that came from fatherhood, the joy that came from raising a...
So what this book also talks about is it highlights the beginnings of the field of sex ed and how it also was a agent to perpetuating these whiteness, racist ideals about whiteness being normal and heterosexuality being normal. And it says, between 1910 and 1940, sex education was a major cultural site for articulating the bourgeois, familial, and social patterns that help to define ideal whiteness, and for training young people of varied backgrounds to reproduce those normative patterns in their sexual behavior. Sex education held forth the hope that the first generation of Americans born and reared under fully modern conditions could achieve reproductive perfection in biologically and socially normal families. Toward this end, sex educators and reformers like Isabel Davenport, one of the first white sex educators, tried to influence the terms in which ordinary boys and girls thought about sex. That is, they attempted to intervene in popular sexual discourses, implanting their vision of normal, modern family life in place of the vulgar sexualities that they perceived as detrimental to American civilization. I wonder what they thought were deviant, vulgar sexualities that were a threat to American civilization. So anyone trying to uphold American civilization is, of course, going to cry when a white supremacist dies. Because if you're a Zionist like Jamie Lee Curtis, your focus, what your desires are, is to uphold whiteness.
Charlie Crist was killed 2 days ago.
Charlie.
I'm sorry.
Kirk. Right.
Kirk. I just call him Crist. I think because of Christ, because of his deep belief. Mm. I mean, I disagreed with him on almost every point I ever heard him say.
Yeah.
But I believe he was a man of faith. Mm. And I hope in that moment when he died that he felt connected to his faith, even though I find his ideas were abhorrent to me.
Yeah.
I still believe he's a father and a husband and a man of faith, and I hope whatever connect.
So you have to understand the tears are coming from losing a soldier and the upholding of whiteness as normal, but also in the commitment to American civilization. So that's the same reason why Dean Withers, the TikTok content creator who debates people against Trump, who is, I guess, presumed to be left or liberal, took to his TikTok live and started crying when Charlie Kirk was killed, and has continued to create videos now trying to clean it up after he has been called out multiple times. But the thing that struck me the most is when he said this.
Don't make that line be one between the left and right. Because if you do make that line fall between the left and right, I will side with the right.
Yes, he will go right because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. He is a white cis man, so he is always going to uphold whiteness unless he actually does the hard work to undo whiteness. But debating people online about Trump is not actually getting into the nitty-gritty of how whiteness actually operates. It just also puts you on a pedestal to look like a good white. White people use black and non-black people as collateral damage in their pursuit of looking like civilized whites, even for better or for worse, even when they're on the left and they're advocating for perhaps black liberation. If they don't actually do the work around whiteness and get into white studies, it's more of the same.